Yeah, I'm pretty sure they can hear us too. And can you hear?
Yeah, but I'll be honest like that.
Ann said she can hear him.
Perfect.
She's the only one that's also not in the room, so.
Okay, cool. And Oscar too?
Oscar as well.
No,
Yeah,
Okay. Okay, we're gonna get started. Hopefully everyone can hear. If you have trouble hearing, just drop it in the chat. Thank you, John, for monitoring the chat. So this is our presentation on ballots and revolution, navigating electoralism as a leftist. So the people who prepared this were Lucia, myself, Jessica, Chris, Abby, Michael, Cameron, and Zach. So thank you to everybody who participated in the process. And
yeah.
and we thought that this was important to do for many reasons. One, it was voted on by the members. And then two, it's, we have an electoral season coming up. And instead of just ignoring what's about to happen, let's talk about it and talk about it from a socialist point of view in a comprehensive way. So the purpose of this presentation is to explore socialist electoral strategies. We're aiming to delve into various socialist tendencies to electoral politics. That's what makes us unique as Broward DSA, is that we are a big tent organization. You don't have to believe one thing or have one tendency. We can all learn from each other and get along, even with our different tendencies. And, that's what this presentation aims to do, is have us learn from different points of view. Examine historical successes and failures, and draw lessons from key socialist movements, including the Marxist-Leninist, social democratic, and anarchist points of view, and how they've approached electoral organizing in the past to help us in our present moment. We want to also evaluate the role of electoral politics in achieving socialist goals. We want to compare different revolutionary movements and electoral strategies. We'll assess the potential limitations, the obstacles of achieving our objectives as socialists through electoral participation in the US today. So just to give you an overview of what we're going to be going over, first, we're all going to present on history. So the social democratic history, Marxist-Leninist, or anarchist. In terms of the social democratic part, it's both social democratic and democratic socialist. There's kind of some fine points on both of those, but we kind of combine them under one umbrella. We're also going to go into challenges in our current situation located in the United States of the 21st century. For example, we have a two-party system. We don't have a parliamentary system. That's something that we have learned through this presentation, and hopefully you'll learn today, is a big issue for achieving our objectives as socialists. Money in politics, corruption in our political system, the questions about third-party voting and the spoiler vote, which seems to come up every year as socialists. And then finally, we're going to talk about what can we do, things that DSA is currently working on and ways that we can all plug in. For example, the DSA's Workers Deserve More campaign. We're going to go over that too.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to Lucia to go over the social democrat point of view.
Okay, so we wanted to start out with the social democrat point of view because for a lot of people, we believe this is kind of what people maybe start out with in terms of leftist or more liberal or more whatever you want to call it. I don't like the word liberal because it has negative connotations, but I think that's like the gateway towards actual socialism and leftist thought. Social democrat, a definition for this that I found was that in a time of war and strife in the 1900s, the ideals of social democracy arose as a compromise between capitalists and socialists in opposition to the evils of authoritarian communism and fascism in order to promote a more equal and tolerant society for their citizens and ensure solidarity between all peoples. So this was meant to be a bit of a compromise, which we can talk later on about the impacts that takes, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things in regards to the history of democratic electoral strategy, if you will. We didn't have too much time to go into that history of the Milwaukee socialist mayors, but there is a lot of history related to in the early 1900s, socialist mayors like Daniel Hone governed Milwaukee, emphasizing political reforms such as clean government, public ownership of utilities, etc. The lesson we can learn from that is that socialists were able to integrate into local governments and implement socialist policies without revolutionary upheaval. I don't know where that came from. Oh, maybe that's because someone entered. Perfect. Another more modern example is the squad, which I think a lot of people maybe know more about. For example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The squad consists of progressive Congress people who represent different parts of the country, but they share left-wing progressive political vision. It's an informal group, and it's always growing and changing. The different colors kind of imply who was first. The people in green were first: Ocasio-Cortez, Omar, Presley, Tlaib, and then Bowman and Bush came on, and then Caesar, Lee, and Ramirez came on after. Like I mentioned, they're a progressive group of people, and later on I will explain how they're a part of also the Progressive Caucus within the Democratic Party. So that's, I think, important as we look into the history and look into the policies that people advocate for in this side. We can see that it's important to be a part of caucuses that have real political power. So, for example, these people advocate for policies rooted in leftist ideology, such as climate justice, healthcare reform, economic justice, and racial equality. So I was giving a little bit of an overview, but I wanted to put a bit of more information of how they're participating in their actual roles. So a lot of them are actually the chairs or co-chairs or vice chairs, for example, of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. It's a very large caucus within the Democratic Party. I highlight that to show that even though there's a lot of things that we don't agree with within the Democratic Party, there is actually a lot of people within the Democratic Party that are trying to, in a way, reform it to be more progressive and to fight for more socialist views. So these are all the people in the previous slide. I also wanted to highlight the fact that Bowman and Bush, unfortunately, will not continue their role because they were just I guess, beat by AIPAC-backed opposition. So I think that is kind of foreshadowing how money is involved in politics and how it can really be detrimental to the people who are trying to fight for progressive causes. Some of their socialist electoral successes is that they've been able to put central pillars of their platform being Green New Deal or Medicare for all. They've also been able to mobilize the young and marginalized voters, especially because a lot of them are from these identity groups themselves, or their constituents represent a lot of that. And then I think in a lot of ways, especially a lot of us now, know more about socialism or like leftist point of views because of, for example, Bernie Sanders, AOC, previous to that, different examples of them. So they've pushed Democratic leadership to adopt more progressive stances, I think. Some historical examples that I wanted to highlight of, quote, taking over from the inside are the Dixiecrats and the Civil Rights Movement. And then a bit of an opposition is the Republican Party and the conservative shift. Both examples show how grassroots and ideological movements can shift major political parties over time by exerting pressures from within. So this kind of presents us an opportunity for DSA. Is there a dirty or clean break that we can take from the party? We'll go into that further, but ideas are building a socialist wing or shifting policy ideas and having more major influence in primary elections. Some pros and cons is, like we mentioned, the increased visibility of the socialist ideas, the actual tangible policy influence that we see with shifting the Overton window within the Democratic Party, making leftist ideas like wealth redistribution, universal health care, and climate action more popular. And the connection to grassroots movements, I think that's always a pro because it shows the reality of who can be in positions of power. It can be all of us. People who participate in Black Lives Matter and labor unions and immigrant rights can also have power in politics. On the contrary, some cons of that are that there is limited power within Congress. As we know, there is always going to have to be a compromise on radical policies. Oftentimes, they're going to have to extend the hand to the other side of the other wing of the party, if you will. And there's ultimately sometimes pushback from both sides, not just the Republicans or the conservatives, but also within their own party. So these are very important topics to keep in mind. I wanted to move on to the next point, which is the Marxist-Leninist viewpoint tendency. Jessica will come back up and speak to that, please.
Okay, hi again. You see me? Okay. So I did these slides on the Marxist-Leninist viewpoint. So just to give like a broad overview of the Marxist-Leninist viewpoint, and then we'll talk about how that applies to electoral strategy. So the Marxist-Leninist viewpoint emerged during the 20th century. So I'm gonna go a little bit off the script here. So it's really started as like an intellectual movement. Marx was a philosopher, and back in that day in the academy, they studied something called political economy. So he's a political economist. So that was kind of like a liberal artsy philosophy, history, economics, political science, all under one roof. And Marx has been extremely revolutionary for all intellectual theory since then. And his whole thing was really all about studying history instead of through ideals. Like people in the Enlightenment studied history through like ideals. It was studying it through material conditions. So go back a little bit.
Oops, sorry.
That's okay, we're not ready yet. So yeah, instead of studying things through just ideals, how we want things to be, he was really more into studying them through how things really are, the material conditions on the ground. So to give an example of that, there were these old white dudes like Hobbes and Locke. You know, they talked all about things like freedom and responsibility and social contracts. Then Marx came along, another old white dude, and he was like, that's all well and good, but like, how are people going to do any of that stuff if like they can barely live and survive? So that was Marx's deal. And then Lenin added on to that because he was more of like that on the ground activist person who was trying to bring that reading of history into real life. So whenever you hear Marxist-Leninism, really think of a way of approaching history, looking at our current social conditions, conditions in the past, learning from conditions in the past, learning from conditions in the present, and doing all of that to achieve a classless, stateless society, which is the ultimate ideal. That's communism. But this is also a very pragmatic philosophy. It believes that things are going to take time. One of the ways that the Marxist-Leninist viewpoint has viewed history is looking at how the move from feudalism to capitalism took like 1,000 years. So really, when we're talking about how we're going to bring about socialism, it's really this viewpoint embraces, it's probably going to take another 1,000 years. And we've already done some of that through struggle, through the process of struggle. So they're seeking gradual change through electoral means, but for this ultimate goal of the stateless, moneyless society. They believe in things like establishing a dictatorship of the proletariat. That's definitely a more controversial idea among a lot of different tendencies, but that's something that the Marxist-Leninist viewpoint will advocate for from, again, looking at those material conditions. So now giving you all of that background, let's apply it to reality. I saw the little language llama come up. Can I explain something?
Dictatorship of the proletariat, explain that one.
Yes, okay, so if you look at like past examples of people actually trying to put all of these ideas into action, there's always that struggle that comes up of like, yay, we won the revolution. However, obviously, look around us, there's plenty of people who vehemently disagree with us. What do we do with all those people? We still live with them. We would label those people like reactionaries, like instead of revolutionaries, like they react against the revolution because they're freaked the fuck out. Like they don't really get it. Understandable. So the Marxist-Leninist perspective would say, okay, well, in order to move us to that stateless, moneyless society where everybody gets along, there has to be some state. In the meanwhile, that's the dictatorship of the proletariat. The proletariat, that's all of us working people, you know, even if we have little bit different class statuses, we all essentially could become fucked over and homeless like tomorrow easily. So it's people like us who are going to be the people who are in charge, not representatives of us necessarily. It's people like us, and we're going to be the people who control the state and help with that transition against the reactionary forces within society. But it's controversial. People don't like that idea. You know, probably a lot of my fellow comrades here don't always like what that looks like, because it can, you know, history has taught us that can look very messy. So does that answer the question? I'm trying to put it like in normal terms. Okay, so Marxist-Leninist perspective towards elections. First off, they think that the ballot box, or I should say we think, the ballot box is a tool or a means to bring about revolutionary ends. It's a means to an end. We can only have true democracy with the overturning of class structure. So meaning we know that we're voting, it's not going to be a real democracy. It's not going to really be democracy. We're not going to really have that until we have an overturning of class structure, but this can help get us there. And then there's often this debate of, is it the ballot or the streets? Is it voting or is it protesting and that kind of stuff? You know, war, revolutionary acts. It's often framed as an either or debate. However, the true Marxist-Leninist perspectives believes that both are necessary. It's not either or, you need both. The way they approach it is voting is registering a preference. It's not exercising real political power. A real political power is exercised when we take to the streets. However, voting and registering that preference can help us to bring about certain ends. For example, it can take the street temperature so that people can actually see if we can get to the streets and if we have actual momentum to do that. So in this perspective, the splitting of the vote or throwaway vote phenomenon, that's based on the idea that voting is an act of exercising real political power. For example, that don't throw away your vote because you're throwing away your political power. This is saying that's not your political power, baby. That's just registering a preference. Then there comes the question of trade unions. Well, trade unions and the streets are different than voting. Trade unions, they say, are an organization of defense for working class interests, but it's for defense, not offense maneuvers. They say you need a vanguard party, an actual structured party in order to do these offensive maneuvers. So we've got lots of different elements to this revolutionary act coming together. We've got the vanguard party, we've got the street action, we've got the trade unions. And so we have to fight this battle on multiple different sides. They're all important. And then of course, voting and registering that preference, that's a preference for the vanguard party. Essentially, bourgeois meaning voting in their point of view, or, you know, participating in bourgeois elections, which is what our current election is according to them. Bourgeois means they can't create socialist ends. reforms are crucial in the revolutionary process, but how you bring about those reforms matter. So meaning, yeah, I mean, of course, voting can bring about reforms. That's addressing the social democratic point of view. But if we just vote in those reforms, we're still gonna have to fight for them in a revolutionary way in order to keep what we fought for. So they're not gonna be given to us, because anything that's given to us can just be taken from us. So Lenin says, we have to fight in a revolutionary way for a parliament, but we can't fight for a revolution in a parliamentary way. So this was an actual debate that was brought up at that time in history, was some people within that vanguard party said, look, we have a parliament. This is a huge win. We didn't have that before. We were ruled by a king. So some people were like, let's just bring about the revolution in parliament through reforms. He was like, no. We have to fight for a parliament and more through revolutionary means. But if we do that in a parliamentary way, it's not going to work. Does that make sense? It's kind of complicated.
No,
Okay.
Oscar has a good comment.
Okay, yes.
If you want to read her.
Yes. Or do I seem like I need to read?
There. It's a good.
Okay, so Oscar, I'm gonna read what Oscar wrote.
That one.
Oh,
about the
this is for
previous one?
Socialist Democratic. Okay, maybe we'll go over that
Sure.
at the end.
When we do the discussion.
Okay, but if anyone wants to write stuff in the chat about this stuff, definitely write it and then we'll go over it at the end. Okay. So part of this perspective is very important, is to run your own race, run your own candidates. So Marx and Engels, at first, Engels just another one of these old white guy philosophers that palled around with Marx. They were just like, you know, friends. They were buds. So at first, they supported voting for the lesser of two evils. You know, okay. But then later, they corrected themselves after, again, doing this Marxist-Leninist exercise of looking at the conditions, of taking a stance, seeing what ends up happening, and then changing their mind about things based on what actually ends up happening. So they corrected themselves that elections are not an end to itself, but they're a means to certain ends, like we already went over. Their conclusions were that it's important to put forward a candidate even when there's absolutely no hope that that candidate will win. That it's important to put in the groundwork to create a vanguard party before the revolution. Essentially, we need an actual strong vanguard party, or else all this talk about revolution, it's never gonna fucking happen. If the vanguard party is imposed on the masses and not supported by the masses, then the revolution is just gonna come and go. It's gonna come, we're gonna put all this work into it, it's gonna be betrayed immediately. Because their people aren't actually a part of the vanguard party. So that's part of the whole like registering a preference thing. Like it's important to like actually see that real people really support this party for real. And elections are also an opportunity for political education and to put out your program. Elections are an opportunity to count your support and determine the temperature on the street. The current situation in the United States in 2024 is that we have no vanguard party to give our movement work a form and a structure. Therefore, movements become moments and they dissipate. So an example of this would be like the Black Lives Matter, George Floyd uprising, the Occupy Wall Street uprising. Like these were amazing social movements that people put a ton of effort into, and they were really exciting and they seemed really hopeful, but then they just kind of went away because there was no form and structure to capture these movements and direct people into a party. They all just kind of got eaten up by the Democratic Party and nothing really happened. And we can look at that again, looking at the material conditions. Cop cities are being built en masse. you know, cops, police offices they're getting more of our money. So we could maybe say, yeah, but the spirit, the this, the that, but that wouldn't be the Marxist-Leninist perspective because it's not looking at the actual material conditions, the money. And obviously people are still being killed with impunity. And I mean, I could go on listing examples. The working class of today were wedded to the Democratic Party. Elites. Oops. How do I go back?
Yeah.
Okay. Elites and working class. The elites and the working class, we both know that we have nowhere else to go. You know, I mean, right now, it's like, do I vote for Claudia and Karina? Do I vote for Kamala and Waltz? It's like, it's a hard choice. And that's because, not because of us as individuals failing, but it's because of this is where we're at systemically. And this enables a rightward ratcheting effect. So the Overton window, that ratchet, it's going rightward instead of leftward because we really have nowhere to go. So here's some case examples from the Marxist-Leninist perspective. The New Deal. So there was a major upheaval in the streets, tons of social movements going on. People were sick and tired of economic crises all the time. There was a growing labor movement, Labor Party in the United States. Concessions were made by the party in office who just happened to be Democrats, and the Democrats subsumed the growing Labor Party. And that's how the Labor Party, like labor types of things, ended up becoming associated with Democrats. It's just that historical event. However, the New Deal has since been dismantled through bipartisan support, through both Republicans and Democrats. So this is a great example of what Lenin said. You can't fight for revolutionary means through parliamentary ends, because it's just all going to get undone in a few years in historical time, because really the New Deal to now, it's like nothing in historical time. The US Civil War is another great example. Slavery, it could not be settled. Alex?
Yeah.
Slavery could not be settled through judicial or electoral means. They tried. There's lots of attempts to do that. It needed to be settled on the streets, on the battlefield. And then the electoral changes followed through that fighting on the streets. The Russian attempts at revolution versus the German attempts at revolution are another great example. During the Russian Revolution, there was a process of many, many years of forming Soviets. So for anyone who doesn't know what an actual Soviet is, you hear of the Soviet Union, but a Soviet at that time was like your local, it was like your local DSA in a way. It was like your local, like, Labor Party, like political education, mutual aid, teaching people who were like, didn't know how to read, and raising consciousness. And it was really freaking cool. That didn't exist. That existed all over Russia. That was all formed before the revolution. The Germans, on the other hand, they tried 3 times to have a socialist revolution, but each time it failed, and each time they were more demoralized, because each time they tried, more of their leadership died or went away, and there was no like real like historical memory. So this eventually led to the reactionary rise of the Nazi Party, who subsumed certain of those socialist elements under National Socialism, but ended up kind of taking over that social upheaval and decay and all of that. So it went, instead of the good way it went for the New Deal, it went in the bad way in Germany. Oh, okay. Okay, so finally the pros and the cons of this point of view. Pros, there's a lot of historical examples. That's always something great about the Marxist-Leninist point of view, is it's great if you're a nerd, like, or it's great if you want, like, show me the facts, show me examples. There's a lot of historical examples that lend credence to these theories and back them up. This point of view believes that large historical changes require large moves. And it broadens our perspective of what is actually required from this present moment to like a larger long-term goal. Other pros, the stated objectives of counting support and building a party base. These are necessary and worthwhile things to do, like even if you're not a Marxist-Leninist, is to count support and have a base. I think most people would agree with just those things alone. And then it also enables socialists to be ideologically consistent within their platform and not compromise with those in power. So a great example is AOC is like, we've seen from her, like a lot of like chipping away and compromise over the years, like in order to retain power and just like fit in. Like this is not concerned with fitting in. It's concerned with standing out. The cons is that it's actually really difficult to do. And again, if you're focused on the short term instead of the long term, it's like a lot of delayed gratification. It's difficult to break in as a viable third party option, especially in the United States, due to our two-party system, and for us to have actual influence in electoral policy. But yeah. It's a long-term approach to see dividends from, and many shorter-term goals are needed to consolidate the power on the left under a one-party structure. There's so many different parties, even right now. There's the Green Party, there's DSA within the Democratic Party, there's the People's Congress, there's the PSL, there's so many different attempts to have a third party left-wing candidate, and this would really require us to have like a one thing, and that is in itself is going to take time and it's going to be hard. So that's that.
Hello, I'm Abby. So we're going to talk a little bit about anarchism and also just direct action as kind of a alternative to voting. And I'm not an expert on anarchism, but I feel like the most important points are the non-hierarchical setup and also voluntary participation. And yeah, we're going to talk about some more examples of that. Okay, so these are like 4 things that I see as kind of really big problems with voting and why we may want to think about other options. So first of all, I think most of us would agree that voting is not democratic because of the Electoral College. Some people's votes in some states are just like worth more than people's votes in other states. We all know there's tons of voter suppression. People are disenfranchised, and there's a lot of money in politics, and actually like lobbying groups have a lot more power than actual just like normal people voting. And like Jessica touched on, there's a lot of barriers to third parties. And then next, like I think it's really important to think about that voting is kind of expressing our consent in a way for the current system. So a lot of us like have a lot of problems with the way the current system is set up, like the founding of the United States, like committing genocide against indigenous people and stealing all the land. And I feel like we should contend with the fact that voting is kind of like participating in our colonial system. And then next, like voting is ineffective. Like Jessica also touched on, a lot of times when we vote for people, like that's not real political power because we're in a representative democracy. So we're delegating someone and just hoping that they will follow through on their promises. And I would say more often than not, that does not happen. They get into office and then they don't do what they said they were gonna do. So is that democracy? Not really. Sometimes we're voting for things like ballot initiatives where we have like a little more direct power. And then finally, I think a big problem with voting is that it gives us the illusion of power. So it's something we can do, something we can like dedicate ourselves to and feel like we're making a difference. But then at the end of the day, are we really making a difference? And that's something where I think looking at our material conditions and evaluating is a really important thing to do. Okay, and then Michael is kind of going to compare electoral action versus direct action.
Hello. Okay, so these 4 points are basically contrasting the differences in electoral action versus direct action. We're just going to go through them one by one. The first one is power. So voting consolidates the power of a society into the hands of a few politicians. Come election season, or even before that, you're never asked what you want as the people, as a society. No one's going up and knocking on your door and going, hey, what can we do for you as the government? What can we do for you as politicians? It is always, I want this thing for our society. Please vote for me. These are my platforms. These are my ideas. And then someone else contrasts them and go, this is what I want. And then you have to basically make the decision because your power is consolidated into those two parties. As opposed to with direct action, society has the power over its own resources, capabilities, and initiative, discovering what they are and how much you can accomplish. So you're basically looking amongst yourselves and going, what do we have? What can we do? What is our time and availability? And how can we do it? Compromise. I mean, it kind of goes back. It's a little bit redundant, but you are compromising with other platforms. You're constantly compromising your ideals. There are groups that overlap, but oftentimes there are things that'll split hairs. A great example, going with DSA and Jamal Bowman, if I'm correct, with BDS and Israel. And that was a big thing that other people were basically going like, no, you should support this person, you know? And other people go, this is ridiculous. This is not how we should be doing these things. That's electoral action. Oftentimes you're essentially arguing your ideals, and you're constantly having to try and bring people to your side. We probably know in our experience working with people who are a little bit more progressive, but not necessarily socialist. You're constantly being told like, hey, why don't you work with us? There's a whole quote unquote Bernie or bust, group that I was, I very much, loved Bernie Sanders, and, I voted and everything like that. And, I put my vote to, push back, but I was told the entire time people knew what I wanted. And ideally, I was being told like, hey, why are you voting for are you voting? Are you making sure to vote against Trump? Because, you said you like Bernie so much. Are you going to do this, thing to overthrow, it was a whole back and forth. And that's constantly what socialists are pragmatically having to go up against in an electoral system. Whereas direct actions, different groups can apply different approaches and strategies according to what they believe and feel comfortable doing. If this is what you want to do, and these are the groups or these are the people that you're working with, and this is what you want, these are your ideals and objectives, you can work amongst each other and push to get that into play. Another one is timing. Oftentimes we're waiting, we're waiting either 2 years or 4 years or however long, for whether it be city council, whether it be on a national scale, for essentially other people to tell us as a society, this is what we are giving you, these are your choices, and get ready to discuss them, at Thanksgiving. And that's essentially not an ideal way to promote society and to have a constructive discussion on how society is run. In a direct action system, you are able to initiate these things now. As we are experiencing, obviously, with natural disasters occurring around hurricane season, we have to essentially wait on other people to basically decide, oh, what are we going to do about climate change? Or what are we going to do about this system? And instead of looking at what we have now, our resources and abilities, and going, what can we do for each other right now? We cannot wait for other people. This is not, there are 365 days, and we can't consolidate all those things that we need in a matter of one season, one election season. So another one is choices. Going back around to the power, and everything kind of like flows into each other. Choices, you're limited on your choices. Even if we had a parliamentary system, even if we had 20 parties, in the end of the day, there are hundreds of millions of people in America. There are billions of people in the world, and you're never going to get a situation where every time you look at your party, you're like, oh, that person gets every single thing. You have to play the game of like, oh, how many things line up perfectly with this person, or how many things line up with this person as opposed to this person. Whereas with direct action, people are free to experiment and they're free to adapt accordingly. And you're free to have groups that, they use the term affinity groups that kind of break off and go like, we're going to apply our direct action in this way as opposed to this way. And I'll pass it off.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about, these are some things that I feel like are the biggest barriers to more effective action. If y'all can think of others, please put them in the chat. So the first one is that a lot of Americans benefit from our unjust system. So it's just like a problem with numbers, basically, that people in the working class, like, unfortunately, just our system is like based on money, and people who have money have a lot of power. And so I feel like this is another reason why we can't just rely on the electoral system, because money is such a big part of that. The next one's that a lot of Americans are not uncomfortable enough to take risks. I feel like this is really hard because a lot of us are like living paycheck to paycheck, but we still are comfortable enough. We're still getting by, that we're not going to throw everything out. We're not going to take these huge risks where we could like get arrested and lose our job. And I wanted to read a George Jackson quote. He was an activist in prison, and he said, "Up until now, the prospect of parole has kept us from confronting our captors with any real determination. But now, with living conditions deteriorating, and with the sure knowledge that we are slated for destruction, we have been transformed into an implacable army of liberation." So I think if you look at history, like a lot of times when like things really got done, it was by people who had nothing to lose. Like they had gotten to this point where they really reckoned with like, we have to risk everything or there's no other way forward. And unfortunately, a lot of people are not in that situation, even though we know with climate change, we have like not a lot of time left. And the third thing is, I think a lot of people still do think that things like voting and other low risk tactics will lead to actual material gains. And then fourth, a lot of our resources go towards surviving and like going up the ladder of the capitalist system. And then fifth, a lot of people who do take direct action are like severely repressed by the state. So I think basically the solutions to all of these problems, I think, come down to three things, which is build relationships, develop solidarity, and political education. So I think like the problem with benefiting from unjust systems, like we really need to develop solidarity. We need to learn about people across the world, people here in our own country and people across the world who basically like our comfort is based on their exploitation and based on the destruction of the planet that we're living in. And once you learn about that and you like develop empathy, you develop solidarity, and you realize like, I cannot go on living with these comforts that are only possible because people are getting crushed. And like, it's not just them, it's gonna be us too. It's gonna be everyone. And then I think like with thinking that voting is going to get any real change, I think political education can fix that. Like Jessica was talking about, like the Marxist-Leninists initially thought like vote for the lesser of two evils, and then they realized that wasn't working. That was a long time ago. So I think if you go back and just look at the history of elections, you can see that that's not how we're going to get real change. And then the most difficult ones, I think, like having resources to survive and also state repression. I think the only way that we can get around that is really like building relationships and knowing that the state is not going to save us. They're only going to oppress us. and we have to keep each other safe. Like, we really need to build relationships and support each other and build networks of caring for each other. And I really strongly believe that if we share our resources freely, then we'll build these like reciprocal relationships. And that's the only way that we're going to survive. And here's just some examples of groups historically that took direct action. So I would love for us to talk more about these like different examples at the end. Yeah. And if you have any, oh yeah, these are the pros and cons that we have. And if you can think of any more, definitely put them in the chat. Michael, do you want to go? over
Yeah,
these?
so one of the pros are non-hierarchical societal structures are less coercive and voluntary governments. Oftentimes if our society is willing to do something, there is usually a caveat to it. A great example, if you look at like charity work, for example, oftentimes, it's like throwing money, but it's a tax write-off, and it's also one of those things where there are certain conditions to it. A lot of our own programs like welfare and everything like that, so, you can get welfare, but you can't do X, Y, and Z things. A lot of times structures like that, government structures are very coercive and they come at a cost. You also have a pro, right? Affinity groups are able to take direct action without needing approval from above or less bureaucracy. So oftentimes, again, you as the people and society and communities ask amongst each other, what can we do for each other? What do I have? What do you not have? What can I do for you? How can I help you? The cons, unfortunately, after revolution, it can be difficult for individuals to contend with the power of the hierarchical with hierarchical factions. So, like Jessica was saying before, oftentimes you are going to have reactionary groups. Not everyone's going to agree on these things. And when you try to form a system that is not based in hierarchy, you're always going to have the other factions and other groups pushing back and going, wait a minute, if this is our opportunity to create a structure, this is how we want to create a structure. And that's a constant. And that is very difficult to push back against consistently. It is also the least familiar societal structure. So it requires the largest Overton window to shift over. It is very easy, not easy, I should say, but it is easier to have a system and then put in new players, if you will. You have a system where, for example, our, liberal democracy, ideally, we bring in a lot of socialists. They would change the social programs and change the structure. And we're like, okay, this is great. This is awesome. But as anarchists, we still look at that and go, that is a hierarchical structure. We need to dismantle it. We need to restructure it. And it's very based in material conditions, but it is constantly needed to change and restructure.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. Thank you, guys.
So that was like the history of the three tendencies that we're gonna review. There's a lot more, like we mentioned, there's Trotskyist, excuse me, and a bunch of other kinds. But now we're gonna go over the current situation. This is a bit of an overview, but we talked about how there's a two-party system dominance. There's a lot of money in politics, which affects the actual it undermines the actual democracy and sidelines working class interests. And there's electoral challenges, like we mentioned, voter suppression, gerrymandering, and the lack of being able to rank choice vote can make it difficult for socialist or progressive candidates to win. Jessica, do you want to go over this part? You wrote a very nice part about the challenge that the two-party system brings.
Okay, so this is one of the unique challenges we have in achieving socialism with United States characteristics, is that in the United States, we don't have a parliamentary system, we have a two-party system. So political parties in the United States, they function differently than in comparable Western democracies, representative democracies such as Great Britain, France, places like that, Germany, which have a parliamentary system. So all of those other comparable Western representative democracies that have very fucked up histories like ours, they have labor parties, and their labor parties oftentimes are in power. We don't have a labor party. It's been attempted and failed many times here. In those other comparable countries that I mentioned examples of, US political parties, they're more like civil society organizations. Here, the party is more of an extension of the state. The DNC, the RNC is very tied to statecraft. They're not these kind of outside, almost like a nonprofit or like an association or like it is in other countries. Therefore, there's extreme difficulty of electing independents and third-party candidates in general elections. Instead, what we typically see when we look at the material conditions in the United States is that insurgent movements have taken place within parties throughout US history, which is why the meanings of party labels have changed so much over time. For example, Republicans today, very different than the Republican of Lincoln. Democrats today, very different than the Dixiecrat Democrats before the Civil Rights Movement. So questions that we can ask ourselves is, if it requires so much resources and it's so difficult for us to create a third party in the United States, could we take over the Democratic Party similar to how the Democratic or Republican parties have been taken over in the past? But if we're going to do that, is the Democratic Party a toxic label for us as socialists to be associated with? Kind of similar to the anarchist point of like, you know, do we even want to be associated with the state in that way? Or can socialists change what it means to be a Democrat? Could the Democratic Party be pushed further to the left so it essentially becomes a functional labor party? And or if we can't do that in the meantime, how could being a minority group within the Democratic Party be leveraged to the fullest possible extent? This is essentially what social democrats, democratic socialists are today. We're a minority group within the Democratic Party. And if that is the case, if that is our current conditions, are we really leveraging that to the fullest possible extent? If we looked at it, we'd probably say no. So how would we do that?
So another challenge that we mentioned is the fact that money in politics is a big reality. A little bit of the history, in the late 19th and early 20th century, the rise of corporate influence in politics began with industrialists using their wealth to shape policy, especially during the Gilded Age. In 2010, there was a landmark Supreme Court decision titled Citizens United. I'm sure we've all are familiar. Where the Supreme Court ruled that corporate spending in elections is a form of free speech, opening the floodgates for unlimited contributions through super PACs and dark money. So they pretty much said that corporations are akin to people and that they are able to donate however much they want. And now we see the increase of lobbying and spending on the federal elections in this graphic from Vox. It's increased exponentially. And then post Citizens United, billionaires and corporate interests gained even more direct influence over both political parties, undermining the democratic processes. That is, I think, a lot central to a lot of what we're saying, is that ultimately, kind of what's the point in voting if the lobbyists and super PACs are gonna sway the person in power in whatever direction their money chooses, for example, AIPAC. Real world impacts. Like we mentioned, it undermines the democracy. Political influence is disproportionately held by the wealthy, drowning out the voices of working class people. There's a big impact of policy corruption. So legislation often reflects the interests of corporations, for example, tax cuts or deregulation, over those of the majority, particularly workers, marginalized communities, and the poor. This weakens the leftist movement, definitely, because socialist and worker-based movements are often sidelined in elections because they lack the financial backing of corporate donors. DSA is fully backed by members, so we know what that means, and individual contributions matter, but ultimately, political campaigns are super heavily funded by PACs, as much as we would love to think otherwise. That's why it's a big deal when people like Bernie, Karina, people in the Green Party, for example, are made up of individual contributions by working class people. Now we're gonna go into the reality of third-party voting. Chris is gonna speak to that.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Major, he, him. Hope you guys are enjoying the presentation so far. I'm here to talk about third-party voting, and this might go a bit against the grain to what we've been saying so far in this presentation. But to talk about third-party voting, I would have to first talk about the problem with our current system. The Democratic Party is split. It has a strong ideological split. It's less a split and more like two different limbs. Not everyone was happy that Biden ended up being the Democratic candidate in 2020. We had a better choice. We had Bernie. There's people that feel like it's important to vote blue and it's a step in the right direction, but they don't really want to hold their nose and vote Democrat this time either. Remember Biden's signature policy in 2020? He'll beat Trump like a drum. That was it. Ultimately, that's what led to him winning, his opposition to Trump. Democratic leaders need to keep everyone in the party, so they make a big deal about being all-inclusive. But that's what winner takes all voting does. It gives us a two-party system. The Democratic Party is one of those parties. And I know what you're thinking, it's the system, man, and it's true. But why though? Why do we only have two parties in this country? We have single-member districts, winner takes all, and plurality election rules where the most votes win. For these reasons, we have a two-party system. Winner takes all creates a two-party system, and it fundamentally changes how you vote. You can't afford to waste your vote, so you stop voting for candidates who reflect your values, and you start voting for ones you think that can win. But when everybody does that, we end up with just two huge mega parties, even though over 50% of Americans want a third party. Is the Democratic Party too big? Yes. In any two-party system, the tent's going to be really big. And what that does is it squashes dissent. The tent gets so big, it squashes talking about important issues in substantive ways because you're not supposed to critique the moderate Democratic leaders. If you're in the big tent, that means you're going to watch your candidate compromise on their values. Every time this happens, people think that they're either psychopaths or complete liars. But the reason Democrats especially have to compromise every election cycle comes back to the way we vote. Winner takes all sends them running to the middle because the only thing they can all agree on is beating the other guy. Harris is the epitome of this. She's a big tent whose only focus is beating Trump. And we got here with winner takes all elections. A smidge of history. You know what's ironic? The two-party system that we have right now was actually the founding fathers' worst nightmare. John Adams said, and I quote, "A division of the republic into two great parties is to be dreaded as the greatest political evil." Nowhere in the Constitution does it say we have to have two parties or winner takes all plurality voting. So why do we have winner takes all plurality voting if it's not even in the rule book? Because the founding fathers just copied what the British were doing. They didn't want us to have two parties, but they inadvertently gave us the system that got us here. We can talk about fixing the Electoral College, gerrymandering, or campaign finance. Those are all important, but fixing those things won't solve negative partisanship. It won't break up the two parties. It doesn't fix the fundamental problem of how we vote. So if you feel helpless, there's still hope. There's something that we have right now that could change the game. Ranked choice voting solves this. It's something where you rank the candidates in order of your preference. What I meant to say, it's different in that it lets you rank your candidates in order of preference. Instead of voting for one candidate, voters rank their preferences, their options in order of preference. Let's say you have 3 candidates. Voters rank their favorites, and once all the first choice votes are counted, if anyone gets over 50%, it's like winner takes all, they win. But if no one gets over 50% of the votes in a ranked choice system, the candidate with the fewest votes gets taken out. So if your first vote has the least amount of votes and gets eliminated, Your vote then goes to your second choice, and now whoever gets more than 50% wins. This is actual majority rules voting, and it's great because you can vote your conscience. And ranked choice candidates have to reach out to all voters, so negative partisanship goes away. Ranked choice voting is a long-term solution. And there are no wasted votes, so third parties can actually grow. But the most beautiful thing about ranked choice voting is we can all do it right now. We have a tool here at our disposal that helps us calculate elections quickly and easily to determine important issues. I personally recommend this site, rcv123.org, as a great place to start. RCV is not just an idea, it's catching on nationwide. Oregon currently has a referendum on adopting RCV. Colorado, Nevada, and DC are all voting on combination open primaries and RCV election structures. Oak Park, Illinois has it on the ballot. Plus, Charlottesville, Virginia just adopted it. Thank you.
So, you want to talk about this part? Seth?
Hello, everybody. Today, the vast majority of DSA members agree that the two-party system is failing us and we need a third party, a working class independent party. The main question surrounding this is how do we relate to the Democratic Party and how do we form this new party? There's three main views on this. The first is the clean break, which advocates for a complete separation from the Democratic Party, aiming to form an independent, explicit socialist party that isn't beholden to capitalist interests. The next idea is the dirty break, which proposes working within the Democratic Party to build a socialist base while preparing for an eventual split when the time is right. And the third is realignment. The realignment strategy involves working within the Democratic Party to shift its platform and policies to the left. Supporters of the realignment strategy tend to prefer flexibility with elected officials' discipline. And for the past few years, the DSA electoral strategy has been called party surrogate, which means we run candidates that are supposed to be representing DSA. They run in the Democratic Party, but they're supposed to be talking about DSA, trying to recruit people, and being oppositional to the Democratic Party. Hasn't been completely like that always, but that was the idea. And a key question to ask, can the DSA realistically take over the Democratic Party from within, or is a new socialist party necessary to achieve true systemic change?
Okay,
Those are-
so. We're gonna do a quick activity for those here in person. If you're watching, sorry, the lights. If you're watching this virtually, I'll explain the activity if you would like to participate, but this is gonna take about hopefully 5 to 7 minutes, because a lot of the people in here are familiar with what we're gonna do. So I'm gonna explain the activity. This is a very broad topic that we're talking about, socialism, electoralism. So one of the ways that we wanted to highlight what we can do and think about is like, if we were to think about our little socialist utopia of like, what would receive the funding that actually is worthy of receiving it versus policing versus, you know, other things that are ultimately impacting how we vote. I kind of lost my train of thought, I'm sorry. But what I wanted to say was, we can do that ourselves, is by thinking through the budget, what would actually be representative of what we want. But then I think it also would highlight the fact that not everything that we want to prioritize is really going to get prioritized. So I have worksheets. It could also just be pretty informal. Michael, did you want to help me with this? Or?
Yeah, I can help you out. I was wondering how long this activity was, just because I didn't know if we wanted to go into question over activity. Depending on how
Questions
long.
over activity. 5 to 7 minutes.
5 to 7.
Sure. Yeah. I think maybe we can just do whiteboard stuff.
Because we're
for the
like
people.
30 minutes before 3.
True.
I got a lot of reading. I didn't know how much more slides we have left. I just didn't know about.
Just me, right?
It's just Zach at the end.
Oh.
Okay. So I thought of a couple of important categories that I think we all care about. I want everyone to think about, out of these 20 or so categories, what would your top 5 be if you could include them in a budget, right? And then I'll move on to the next part. Okay, climate crisis. Could you also help write some down? There's markers. Right there.
Yeah.
Bodily autonomy. Yeah. Okay, so climate crisis, bodily autonomy, labor rights, wherever, yeah. I'll write can you write them down in the chat for me? Huh?
Yeah, sure.
Labor rights, LGBT protections. Should have wrote it down in my one.
Sorry, guys, I really don't like writing.
Oh.
It's really bad.
To use the typing.
Yeah, I'm used to typing.
I'm saying another like 15.
Fucking now. I'm not voting.
Okay, I'm gonna type it out here.
Oh.
It's not letting me go.
Yeah, you can do dead, all dead.
Housing.
Yeah, just tell them, everyone to choose top 5 out of these. Mhm. No, it's in the Zoom chat. It's fine. I'm writing it down. Labor rights, bodily autonomy. Whatever you got.
Okay, cool. Be freedom.
I'm just figuring out, I figured probably.
Okay, does anybody have ideas that aren't on here? We have climate crisis. What?
Bad stuff.
You want to write bad stuff?
No, that's okay. We don't have to, like, you don't have to contribute. So basically, everyone is gonna get like 10 votes, okay? And then you can decide how you would wanna distribute money to these different things. So you could like pick 10 things you care about and give each one, or if you like think 100% of the budget should go to climate, you could give climate 10 talents. So like obviously, like, I don't believe in policing, I'm not gonna put any talents there, no money for police.
Should we just like go down each one and go show of hands,
We could do that, or we could like let everyone just come up and like, read the values, that might be faster. Are you cool with that, with like?
Alright.
Okay, so, but first, like, if there's like a category that isn't on here, that you think should be on here? Yes, yes, okay, I just put housing, but I will put like more.
Housing / homework.
Pick a marker.
Yeah.
How a marker?
What about food? Yeah, food, that's a good one, too. That's also good. Rehabilitation. Yeah. I feel like, I'm gonna put that with one.
What is it, communal violence, I mean, like violence and stuff?
I feel like that means like conflict, mediation kind of thing. Conflict. Yeah,
Yeah.
Like as an alternative to prisons.
and so.
Me, you?
Maybe instead of 10, we'll do 5.
Okay.
Just to make it a
Each
quick.
bus at 5.
I'm gonna put
Each,
it in.
everyone gets 5 votes for out of, what?
I feel like somebody could put 2 tallies.
You can put all 5 on one, however you want to divide it. Infrastructure.
Should we start like table by table?
Yes,
Yeah, I like that idea.
as you want. If you're decided, come up.
If you wanna come up,
Because if you have
with
other
your motion.
categories, this is your last chance to add a category.
We'll say you're a party of 1, you put down. There you go, we got 3 for the orange
Perfect.
party.
Okay, yeah, everybody uses,
There we go. Yeah, that's 5.
oh, 5.
This is supposed to be local,
Yeah,
national?
county,
Well, it's
Broward
yeah,
County.
County, yeah.
We're Broward chapter, so this is Broward County.
Oh.
Yeah, so if you think that climate is the most important and you think all five go there, then do your 5 tallies. Otherwise, you can divide it out as you so want.
I live in Palm Beach County.
You could
That's okay,
still
that's okay,
participate.
Get in here.
We value your
Thank you.
opinions.
Thank you for coming. Put your votes on there for sure.
People move sometimes, we could say that you move.
Or you can vote for Pauline.
Yeah.
That's for Pauline, yeah.
So this is actually, going into, I'm not trying to do too much stuff, but it's actually an example of quadratic voting, which is another social choice theory. So the idea of allotment of your quote unquote points is a more new concept of a social choice theory, which is similar, you know, ranked choice voting is a different type of social choice theory. Approval voting is another one. First past the post.
No, yeah, good with the motion.
Okay, Anne said homelessness, labor rights, food, healthcare, and climate.
I'll give,
Yes.
are you guys putting your markers back in here? That's
I
cool,
did.
so, that's okay. I'm just making sure.
Some of
I'll
them-
give Anne individual color, so Anne's going.
Yeah, there's not
Oh,
enough.
there are, how many towards war? Just one each, we'll say one each?
Yeah, one.
Okay,
What did you say?
I was asking my Anne, it was, just one each?
One each, yeah, she
Okay,
listed
so
5.
One for housing, cause I assume that's.
Yeah, housing, homeless, labor rights. Food
So there's what, jobs or somewhere in here? The laborers to the right, thank you.
above LGBT.
Okay. What else we have?
Food,
Food.
healthcare, and climate.
Oh, I don't know why I read debt and food together. And debt food.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we could be getting
Yeah,
into
no,
that.
it's just gonna, it's all gonna be. What were the other ones?
Healthcare and climate.
Healthcare and climate. Healthcare. Top right. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Oh, also, this is a screenshot of the actual proposed budget for Broward County for fiscal year 2025. It's all available online if anyone's ever interested. There's budget meetings that they're required to do that we can participate in. This last one, BSO is asking for an egregious amount of money. And even though everyone, yeah, exactly, even though they fought back against it, they still gave them an egregious amount of money.
They were asking
problem is
for
we didn't-
95,
% increase,
Technically?
right?
something like 30 something.
Yeah, no, it's like.
It's
They were sort of between 30 and 50, now they wanted 90, but they got like 50
Right.
something anyway. Problem is, we didn't have a better proposal to give them, the BSO was like the only one that gave them a proposal, they had to read.
Please, yes, grab food.
Yeah,
Wait, am I doing closing? Is there a closing?
You're the closer pretty much.
I'll jump in, I'll help you out, because I know you read and look at it.
I got a lot of reading.
Yeah, no, go. You got this.
Michael, if you want, you
I love
can
reading.
slide.
Did you
that? Did Jesse
I don't know, whoever, if you, I can sit down, you guys. You're right.
important moment.
It's a very motherly thing, you're doing great.
We're being her mom debt.
No.
For her son.
I'm like coddling with you, I'm like, I'll take care of it. You sit down.
You work so hard.
One thing that I noticed with this is that we didn't put anything for operations. Because this, you can see there, operations is the majority. So that is just.
What
I
qualifies
find
as
that
operation?
If you look at it, it's like a lot of their like,
Is transit operation, is that good?
Yeah, like everything, school.
a lot of things are under that umbrella, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at like how our budget is, for DSA.
You're
Like a lot of it is just like fucking.
Paying these room rental fees.
Yeah, we need to like.
That is all operating logistics.
It's not much it costs to just like keep the stoplights going.
Which is why I still have not proposed.
Okay. Have we
Okay,
can,
sorry, Allison.
no, you're okay.
And then we can, yeah.
We can announce.
Right.
kind of
Well,
we-
yeah, no, this, the.
By the way, do you guys have, this is a little informal, but do you guys have any suggestions on how we can go about voting on our budget? Because it still is a resolution we're addressing.
DSA budget?
Yeah, we're gonna present it in the general, regularly, actually, I'll put it in the
You
Discord,
posted.
but to actually vote on it and decide and figure you guys out, or you can always just, we can have it very like, oh, I want these things. And then we can just work at steering and be like, this is what we're going for because this is, yeah.
Okay, can someone go up to that whiteboard and I will announce the results and then we can like,
We have to tell them,
like, we can write like the number,
or can we
right?
do the top? Or
Yeah.
what do you, what are
So
we
it
doing?
looks like housing has. Housing has 11, yeah.
Okay. Labor rights has 7,
Okay,
Healthcare has 6.
climate has 8?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Infrastructure has 3.
transit has 4,
Mm,
right?
Yeah, I
That's
think
4,
so.
yeah, okay.
Food has 2, I think, yeah.
Jobs has 1, but would that just be labor rights? I don't know who put checked off jobs.
maybe like job
A
opportunity.
little odd because I thought some of the categories overlap.
Yeah, okay, so should we just? Put,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
So what?
Eight
Job-
labor.
So
The
labor.
labor,
Okay.
so put one more on labor.
Okay, debt has 2. Education has 3, did we say that?
No, education, that's good.
And that's.
I think that's it.
That looks like it.
Okay, so it
Do
seems
you have
that how,
any LGBTQ?
oh,
2, oh, sorry, yes, 2.
Bodily autonomy has 1, maybe we could.
Fine.
We can look those up.
Oh,
I think that's everything.
wait, LGBTS two,
yeah,
and bodily autonomy is one?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I just wanted to highlight whoever's there watching for. This is kind of what we came up with here in person. It seems that we all value housing right now. I think it makes sense given where we live. What'd you say? Leave it. Yeah, housing, labor and climate are our top 3 things that we care about. I imagine that we all obviously care about all of these topics, but it is hard to actually rank them and prioritize them.
What's the? Would be like material conditions. that they actually all-
Exactly.
Yeah.
I
Yes,
feel like if we were to do this, if this was democracy, this would be like a great starting place for then like debate. Of like what does it actually mean?
Yeah.
To, like put like 11 towards housing.
yeah,
8 towards labor, like.
monetarily.
Then vote again.
Yes, if we had more time, this would be a great opportunity to really look and delve into the reality of how budgeting works and how that actually indicates what policies and actions can actually take hold. So thank you all for participating. That was awesome. So let's move into the third and final section.
that's you, buddy.
This is you. I can give the overview and Zach Yipu will give the rest. So what can be done? We can build grassroots power. We can participate in electoral reform and we can try and do a bit of a dual strategy. We're partial for you to join DSA, obviously. And Zach will go into why DSA and what we believe in.
Okay, so as most of you should know, DSA is a democratic mass organization. Every 2 years, DSA members elect delegates to go to a convention and vote to represent our political viewpoints to shape the organization how we want it to be. At our 2023 convention, delegates voted to support two electoral focused resolutions. The first one is called Act Like an Independent Party. There's a few different components of this. First, the whereas clause, the key to defeating the far right and beating the Democratic Party lies in presenting a third democratic socialist alternative for working class people that is organizationally, strategically, and visibly independent of the Democratic Party. Second, building our own list of voters and volunteers, our own independent fundraising capacity, our own candidate school, and exploring building our own tech tools. Third, developing our own legislative programs, organizing separately from the Democratic Party and legislators in socialist and office committees, expecting our candidates to endorse other DSA candidates and block voting, running our candidates explicitly and proudly as democratic socialists, and developing our own party identity and common messaging. The other resolution is called Act Like an Independent Party, and this says that DSA should encourage movements that prioritize, this is about how we relate to the 2024 presidential election. And it says DSA should encourage movements that prioritize mass participation and independence over recognition from top-down NGOs and the Democratic Party. And then it also says the NPC, which is the National Political Committee of DSA, the highest decision-making body in DSA, should form a multi-tendency national committee to prepare for the 2024 national election by putting forward a positive program. This resolution also stated that to endorse a presidential candidate, it has to be set to a vote of the general membership of DSA. So I think most of you remember we had debates on how we felt about the presidential candidates. And the result was the overwhelming majority of DSA members did not want to endorse Democratic Party candidate or a third party candidate. And this positive program is the first time DSA has had a political program in our history. And we are calling it The Workers Deserve More. And this is the preamble. So in the 2024 elections, working people have few good options. In most races, Americans will have the choice between far-right Republicans and corporate Democrats. In both cases, workers lose, and our politicians will remain controlled by their corporate donors, not the ordinary people who voted for them. Under this status quo, inequality will continue to worsen, corporations will continue to sell war and wreak havoc on the environment, and the worst impacts of these crises will be felt by the poor, people of color, and working people generally. But we, as working people, should have power over our own lives, and that includes the government and economy by and for the working class. Neither major party is capable of advancing a positive program for the 2024 elections that meets the needs of the majority of Americans. That's why the DSA is presenting a bold alternative course in our 2024 program, Workers Deserve More. We hope to bring together millions of people throughout the US to fight for true democracy, where working people have control over their own lives, their government, and the economy. We deserve more, and we have to fight like hell to make that vision a reality. You want to split this in half? Or I could read it all.
Are you asking me?
Well, like, not this slide, but the next one. I'll read this one.
If you want, sure.
It's a lot of reading, and I'm fasting.
That's okay.
The US political and economic system is failing the working class. Millions struggle with low wages, dangerous working conditions, and limited control over our own lives, all while the top 1% has gotten richer and richer. Billionaires control access to basic human needs like housing, healthcare, and education, and make a profit off of them. This capitalist economic system is the cause of violence, unemployment, and climate crisis that poses an existential threat to life on Earth. Black and brown workers in racially segregated communities bear the brunt of capitalism's cruelties, suffering especially from poverty wages, discrimination, deportation, and unemployment, often pushing workers into illegal activity to survive. Instead of investing in working class communities, capitalists prefer to police and incarcerate workers they consider expendable to protect their wealth. Accelerating declines in living conditions are exploited by the Christian nationalist right and figures like Donald Trump. Americans rejected the far-right agenda in the 2020 elections and watched a failed coup attempt to overturn the election results. The far right threatens American civil liberties. They attack the right of people to decide whether to have a kid by overturning Roe versus Wade and continue to restrict abortion access. Now they attack the rights of queer and transgender people by banning gender-affirming care. These culture wars are intended to pit workers against each other and to empower what's over a right-wing government.
Yeah, my fellow thing, I don't like that.
All right, Michael.
Get rid of it.
Happy?
Always.
Okay, so this is the first part of the political program, which is about thriving working class communities. We support Medicare for all, the end to the war on drugs, fighting mass incarceration and police brutality, college for all, housing for all, and supporting working families. How's it?
Oh, good job.
The- Skip the reading.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think you kind of.
Okay. Overview, Republicans suck, Democrats suck. We need a third party, a socialist, independent, working class party. And our political program, we support Free Palestine, liberation of peoples of the world, end to the US war machine, no more economic warfare, and freedom of movement and freedom of people to stay. We want a 32-hour work week. People deserve more leisure and more control of their own lives.
Yeah.
More union power. We believe in organizing workers, taxing the rich, and eco-socialism. We believe the Constitution is fundamentally undemocratic, and the Electoral College fucking sucks. We should have universal suffrage. Everyone living here, regardless of citizenship, should have the right to vote. We should have a representative Congress rather than a party electoral system. We should have popular vote for president, and we should get rid of the Supreme Court. Undemocratic institutions suck.
You should.
DSA is a democratic Big Tent organization, which means that there are people with all different left-wing ideologies. You've heard from a few different groups today. The organization positions are capable of being changed through organizing. If you are dissatisfied with a certain position in DSA, it is your job to talk to other members, bring them together, and push to change the organization's positions. Caucuses in DSA are groups with shared perspectives on organizational issues who strategize together how to shape DSA the way they deem necessary to bring about socialism. These could be questions of labor or electoral strategy, how to budget organization expenses. Member caucuses write resolutions, do political education, develop organizing skills, run members for chapter and national leadership, and much more. And I could go over if anyone has questions about the caucuses, but it takes a lot of time, so I skipped. Conclusion, am I doing this?
Yeah, I can do it, sure. I'm really just gonna read the slide, because, I ain't read it, but it's okay. Yeah, voting is just one tool at our disposal, and even that can be debated. But it should be thought of as just the beginning to political participation and never as a limit to it. Despite or because of our different tendencies and opinions on voting strategies, we can and must work together to expand democratic participation in every aspect of our lives. Here's some sources. All right, and question time. Light coming on. Okay. Do we want, I think it'd be easiest if we, like, whoever presented come up and then kind of do a question. How do you guys like, actually, I'll ask before.
We can just see if there's questions to begin.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Are there questions?
Oh, yeah, there were, but I think, I don't know, I'm curious about the questions there, maybe too. What do you guys think?
Well, let's see if there's any general questions or questions in the chat, and then we've also prepared some.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I thought it was in this.
No, figured you could. Okay. Nothing from the crowd? Oh, go ahead, please.
This is my first meeting.
Welcome.
So,
Thank you so much.
so a lot of questions, but I want to ask all of them in a group setting. So I guess I'll ask the most important one, which is like how frequent are meetings and how does communication work within the Broward DSA? I heard a couple times referenced like a chat. So just communication and the frequency of meetings are very important to me. So
Oh, okay, so I'll answer that.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, as far as, group communication goes, we do have a Discord that is, usually our go-to. As far as frequency, our general body meeting is once a month. It's the first Thursday of the month. We do have throughout the month, different groups, different working groups will meet on occasion, different committees will meet on occasion, and it just really depends on what your interest is that you would apply your availability to those things. Just in our last general body meeting, we had a poll to kind of get an idea and feel for what people prefer as far as availability, so that ideally we can work the schedule for the people who want to be able to be available for those working groups. So
We could talk to you after about joining the Discord, because
Yeah.
it's the best way to get updates. But we also post updates around meeting on our Instagram. And we have an email list too, where we post our like every week, like what we have going on, because we have events like this, and we have working groups that meet, and then we have our general body meeting. So there's a lot of ways to fund.
there's a decent amount of overlap between the softwares and stuff that we use.
this is like this isn't a general body. This is like a specific event.
Like a teaching.
Yeah. So, thank you for coming.
Yeah, seriously, thank you.
No.
No.
Thank you so much.
No, all of us going through come to one event, like you are too. Like we all, we had to start with one. So that's how we all joined.
Do we want to do any other questions here and then go into the chat? Do you like that?
I think we should read the discussion.
Rediscuss, okay.
Okay, so did your ideas about electoral strategies change at all due to this presentation? Yes.
Okay, I will say, I am not a like Marxist-Leninist person just because I tend to like read less older material and more like current things. But I was like very interested in your friend Jessica, and I feel like a lot of it resonated with me, like just basically constantly evaluating is what we're doing working. I feel like that's really important and we should be doing that more. And then also what you're saying about like voting as registering your preference with whatever political power, I feel like that is super important. And yeah, just a lot of ideas that really resonate with me that I don't really associate with Marxism because I don't know, I guess that just doesn't come up as much, but when you're talking about like voting specifically, that really resonated with me. And yeah, I think that's a really important way to look at it, to know that us like delegating other people, that is not political power, that's just us being like, hey, what you said like kind of sounds good, hope you follow through on it. So taking this back.
Yes. Okay, let's nerd out anytime. One thing that I have been thinking about a lot more is like the importance of reforms, like the importance of reforms to like bring more people to the cause, like gain momentum, like gain hope, actually change the material conditions in people's lives. And one reform that I think is really important that I learned about today was ranked choice voting. So that, because I really do think that even if we have a vanguard party successfully, who's to say that vanguard party isn't just gonna become taken over by fucking Stalin or some shit, like actually happened in, history. So that's why I think like having those reforms, like democratic reforms within the process is really critical. And I do think that's NBSA would do that. Like in national like conventions and stuff, they do that. So I think fighting for that could have like a domino effect in terms of like actually bringing about the mandate.
Oscar, perfect. Thank you. You're right. I agree with that. Oscar said stack in the chat. If you want to go, I can unmute you or you can just type it out. Up to you.
Yeah, I can speak.
Okay, yes. You're
I've got
unmuted.
lots of points. Hello,
Sorry.
hello.
Wait, no, I can hear you, but the volume is
Yeah.
low for some reason.
Oh, it's just a
I
copy.
will keep
It's
talking.
just a
so
crappy
we can
speaker, but
adjust
I'll
it.
relay your message, sir.
Oh, okay. I just want to say this was a great event. I had heard this phrase a lot, and I've heard it a lot just in general of the ballot or the streets. And I think that although it gives that sort of binary of like within and without the electoral process, I think that it obfuscates where real institutional power comes from, which is rather than just our vote alone or protests alone, you know, our workplaces, you know, as workers organizing collectively. And I think that it's kind of a byproduct of just how even fighting for revolutionary aims under a capitalist system, we're taught to think of individualistic means of, you know, sort of organizing, whether it's a vote or individually attending a protest, but not actually building collective power, or, you know, power as a class in itself. We're thinking about it along a class line, that we are not just individuals that support these particular demands or aims, but we are part of a, you know, a social class that has the same exact interest to do so. So I would like to, you know, maybe emphasize, you know, the third space of the workplace itself and the power that that has. I know that's a lot. So if you're relaying that, I don't know if that's too much. I also have some other things, but I want to give it to other people if it's an obstacle to relay that.
We heard you.
We heard you because Abby, Abby is really smart and she put it on a different speaker. So we all heard you. I think you're making super valid points, Oscar, of it's not one or the other. I really think it can be both. And ultimately, I think building community is the answer to a lot of things that would help to push forward our policies that we want and just material changes. Let me see if there's anybody. Oh, Stack. Abby wants to add. So yes, please.
I don't think we'll do it. Okay. Okay, I just wanted to say I totally agree, and I wanted to like bring it back to those three things that I was talking about, like build relationships, develop solidarity, political education. Like I really feel like those are the things, just like connecting with people and then like learning about what's already happened, like what works and what doesn't. So I completely agree, and I think about like voting a lot of times we do think it's like a very individualist thing. You like go into the like little booth all by yourself and you like push the button, and yeah, I feel like that's not, as humans, like that's not how we should be making decisions. And like most of the time, and like building community, we should be like talking things out. So yeah, and if you want to, Oscar, if you have other thoughts, we can hear you, so go ahead.
Oh yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. So I had written in the chat, like when we were talking about the SOCDEM strategy, I think that we've been seeing, you know, particularly engaging within bourgeois, you know, parliament, or as we've been clarifying, it's the two-party system, not really parliamentarism in our case. I think it's really important to understand the role that socialists play, even when we're running as candidates within it. Just like how elections under the, you know, the Leninist or the Marxist principle is just a sort of referendum to see where the class is, you know, in regards to their consciousness, rather than a means to fundamentally change the system itself. I think it's important that we use our positions of power not only as a platform, but to expose, you know, the limitations of its politics. And that doesn't necessarily mean to completely agitate, or to say that this is bourgeois and we shouldn't be here, because it wouldn't make sense to most people. Then why are you running as a socialist if you don't think this works? I think that reforms are the tools in which we push the limits of what democracy looks like in the ways of ranked choice voting, which is objectively more democratic. Some would say that that would legitimize the system even further because you're trying to reform it. But I would say that it only gives people the understanding of how much pushback there will be from the ruling class when you put forward, you know, truly democratic principles and push the definition of what bourgeois democracy looks like. Because if democracy truly is, you know, so institutional and such a representative of what this country is, but we realize that economic democracy is an extension of that, and they push back against that, I think that's a strong argument for why, you know, the ruling class will limit what truly is a democracy, the majority of people having working class interests that are not being met. And I think that, you know, ranked choice voting, you know, pushing things to the most democratic they possibly can be till you receive that pushback and then agitate from it, is sort of the implementation that I think socialists should pursue when you know, utilizing a platform such as, you know, congressperson or even locally. Obviously policies that benefit people is important, but making those political arguments and pipelining people into a centralized body or like a mass org like DSA, rather than, you know, fighting for the Democratic Party or otherwise, is probably the best way to build the power beyond electoralism as well. But those are just my ideas for how to use electoralism best, which ultimately I think should be to make those clarification or make those exposures while also pipelining people towards our organization, if they want to fight beyond what those limitations that we will encounter. Check.
Thank you so much, Oscar. I really think you're so right in all the points you're making, and it's a good like thought process and experiment for that you pose to us about what more we can do. What do you think are the biggest obstacles and opportunities to achieving these socialist ends through electoral means in the US today? I know we've talked about some parts of that, especially with what Oscar just mentioned. What do y'all think here in the room?
The question, I'm sorry.
What do you think are the biggest obstacles and opportunities to achieving socialist end through electoral means in the US today? Chairman, you raised your hand.
I think Democratic Party leadership, honestly, because any movement that's in any way actually leftist and socialist is gonna be and is actively opposed by the Democratic Party, which is one of the things, I'm gonna cheat and go a little bit in the last question too. One of the things that I learned and appreciated about what you were saying, Michael, is maybe the negative effects of voting, you know, giving legitimacy to a system, a party that is actively opposed to what we want to do. If we spend as DSA all this time to endorse somebody like Jamal Bowman, we shouldn't have to spend time to try to get him to stop supporting a genocide. And then when he finally does, gets primaried, allowed by the party leadership, and then we don't even have anybody there. So what was the whole point of that? Or AOC, we, you know, give her credence, and then the day after Biden announces that he's gonna run again, or not on the literal day, but very soon after, she endorses him without even trying to extract any kind of concessions. So when I'm looking at my ballot, which sucks, I'm like, okay, I'm thinking like more deeply now, like who actually, I'm not just gonna vote for somebody who's not bad, I'm gonna vote for somebody who's actually gonna try to fight for socialism and against that party leadership. And if I don't think they're gonna do that, then I think I'm actually doing something bad by voting for them. So that's
Thank you. Oh, wow, hands. I think Jessica was first. Go ahead, and then Michael, and then our friend back there.
I think one of the big challenges is just building consensus on the left. Like, I think that the left is really fractured, and it's like I was saying in the presentation a bit, like we have so many different organizations and strategies, and if we look through the last 100 years of American history, there have been so many things that have come and gone. You know, like, there's been so many orgs that have had a wide membership for a while, and then they like completely don't exist anymore, and that's a huge issue, because we can't build any momentum. So to me, that's something I really like about DSA. Obviously, for my presentation, I'm a Marxist-Leninist, and I have friends from my past who are part of PSL, and I see things that they do in PSL, and I'm like, that's so cool. For example, like, in order to join PSL, you have to commit to like taking multiple education classes, and everybody kind of gets educated on the same thing so that they have a base of knowledge that they can draw upon together. But then I see the problem with that is that how could you have things that we have right now, where it's people who have come from all different tendencies, belief systems, sections of society, and talking and working and connecting together? We wouldn't be able to do that if I was like, Michael, in order for me to be in relationship with you, you have to believe the same thing that I have to believe. Like, I don't think that that's possible or fair. And I think something that's really cool about DSA National is that it is people from all these different caucuses doing democracy together within the left. But I think that that's a big struggle, is like, how do we get more people under one tent? I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you. Michael, you wanna go?
Yeah, well, it kind of leads into what you were saying too, where it's a little bit of, you know, it's not contentious, but it kind of, I think I can add to it, is, the big one, I think, is education. You know, I've told Zach this story jokingly all the time. It's like, when I started, you know, in DSA, I went to a barbecue, there was a guy who made a joke about like Mao or something like that. I was like, whoa, in my head, I'm like, that's like, guys, that's super extreme, like, that's crazy, you know? And like, I had no idea, because my politics at the time was only based on basically like Bernie Sanders and AOC. Like, I didn't have much of a frame of reference. And, you know, I started taking the time, because I love politics. I find it interesting. I find history fascinating. And I started taking the time to read, and, you know, like, I constantly sharing books with people. I constantly want people to know. And I think that that on a communal level is very important, because I have friends of mine who don't really know my politics well, and then I'll start talking about it, and they're like, oh, that doesn't sound that crazy at all. That sounds actually like a really good idea. And I think that the only way you can destigmatize is not necessarily to have groups like appropriate it or make it a popular word like socialism or whatever. It's to educate, because just because the word is in the zeitgeist, just because, you know, Bernie Sanders is self-described, you know, democratic socialist, doesn't really change anything, because people don't know that history fully. And sometimes it's full of this misinformation, all kinds of historical myths, and that requires a lot of work. But like, when you were saying the PSL thing, I thought that was fascinating. And I don't necessarily think that if you were to take, I don't know how they're structured, I'll make it very clear that, but like, I think it is important for people to take education courses maybe before they join a group, not necessarily to dictate what they choose as a faction or tendency or whatever, but to know and have an equal footing on all these things, and have a very educated base on why you're choosing these things. Because they are all, you know, equally important. They all have a place in history. But like, my politics went from very, you know, democratic social democrat, essentially Bernie Sanders type, and then it shifted, and now, you know, I describe myself as an anarcho-syndicalist. I put full respect on all the history that Marxist, Leninism, and all these others before have done, but like, I wouldn't have known that if someone, you know, I didn't go out of my way to do it, and oftentimes people, unfortunately, you don't, you know?
We don't have a structure for that.
Yeah, and I like the idea of there being it. I think communal education is so much,
You're right. Thank you.
you know? So last thing I was saying is like, right-wing parties, that's their whole job. I mean, PragerU is a great example. I mean, I'm a very negative version of that,
Mhm.
but they meme the shit out of things. They constantly are educating their base and filling it with, like, all throughout, you know, the internet, like, this is what it is, this is what they want to do to you. Like, it's really effective, and we should have a communal leftist version.
So true.
2 + 2 = 5, and 2 + 2 = 8, and all of the lies have been 2 + 2 = 4.
Perception is reality. So if their perception is what they're sharing, then that's what people think is reality. Please go ahead. Sam Morrell, right?
So I have my sample ballot for Palm Beach County and do I have to vote for share?
No,
I'm sorry?
you don't have to.
I don't think
so. I think you can leave whatever.
Oh, yeah, you can leave empty, you can leave things empty.
Yeah, if you don't want to vote for any particular section, you're free and entitled
I
to
see
do that.
county clerks and stuff, if I don't know enough, I'm like, I'm not doing.
Yeah.
That's not on my,
Your vote is your vote, so. Totally.
No, like for Palm Beach County, who DSA endorses.
I don't believe anybody's explicitly endorsed by DSA, specifically for Palm Beach County, because at least for Broward, we believe that if they're not explicitly a DSA member, then it wouldn't be right for us to endorse them because it would require our backing, our people power. However, there is a lot of really good resources online, like I use Vote 411, I think I used as one. The ACLU has like voting guides. A lot of different groups that you might relate to or think through have very good points. And that I think you can disseminate some things from.
Yeah, if you're, on the Discord, I forget, I remember when, in August, when we had the primaries, it was something from.
Maria.
Yeah.
From,
They're in Palm Beach though.
from Palm Beach, right.
No, oh, but they're in Palm Beach. This one was Broward and there's there,
Maria lives in Miami, but voted
Oh,
for.
That-
Right.
yeah, that's what- okay.
so,
Well, we can, we can try voting guides if we.
Yeah.
To the Palm Beach DSA.
Yeah.
he is, I think, recently.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah,
We haven't made like.
no,
Yeah, it's kind of a tightrope because we're technically a, nonprofit social service organization, so the political endorsements, you start to run. We don't want any more IRS scrutiny.
Yeah. But yeah, we'll definitely connect you. I know via Instagram you're following us. So as we get more local things for South Florida, Palm Beach, etc., I'll send them to you. And if anyone has any resources that they personally use, please send them to me. I even brought my ballot today because I actually don't know who is on a lot of these things, even though we voted in the primary. A lot of what we were saying is also related to that third question, which is kind of like, what do you think are the biggest pitfalls with the tendency you favor? I'm hearing a lot of points related to that, but does anyone have anything in specific?
Well, I want
Sorry, go ahead.
to say before we do this, though.
Oh,
I think
sure.
It was really instructive to me, when we did the rank choice, or just even the selection of issues, how much unity there is within our group, because I think if you were to take just a view of like the activity from our Discord server, you would think that like TRDA, was our like defining issue.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, that's where the need is. That's where we can take direct action. But if you pull back, it's a lot of it is still, guaranteed employment, housing, other things like that. There are issues, I'd say the areas that we're most focused on are not necessarily where we are putting ourselves or putting our visibility or where we are the most visible. So it's a little bit of a tricky thing, but I think from an electoral perspective, it's, well, paycheck to paycheck, regardless of how we're paid or even, union rate, that would only take you so far. So in a rambling way, I guess what I'm saying is that if we focus more on organizing things rather than maybe necessarily cultural issues as opposed to foundational beliefs, probably that might be a key to being more successful because you're less likely to be co-opted by, Kamala saying, well, it's frat girl summer and I'm so and so. It's like, okay, yes, that's cute, it's meme worthy, but really, you're not getting,
Very true. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Wait, sorry, I forgot that you wanted to say something. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's good. I just want to propose something. I feel might be a little bold, but would it be okay if like from here on out, like in Discord, I created like a little separate thread and kind of had vote hosted in there, like you can go to a thread in the Discord and I might like bring forth a topic that, you know, might need addressing and like any kind of choices people want to go for, they're welcome to like reply right then and there. And from there, like a ballot will be created and going forward, we can kind of decide on key decisions and we could even decide on what kind of decisions we will be deciding on, you know what I mean?
Like a channel.
Like, yes, like a dedicated, like, it's not gonna interfere with anything else, but you can go there and, I don't know, just
And practice the ranked choice
Yeah.
voting.
maybe like a votorama, we can choose the name on that too. But
I like that idea. I think like the only thing we'll have to kind of like figure out how we want that process to interact with like the ballot, like resolution process. But I really like that idea of just like, maybe it could start off as kind of like a non-binding thing, like kind of like get a vibe check on like where everyone's at. And then maybe that would be like a cool way to kind of like lead to like what is a ballot resolution or like a resolution, sorry, that like needs to be like proposed based on how everyone feels, but just no one has like had the time to write it down.
yeah, that would follow it, what did you just call it a second ago? So-
Non-binding vibe check.
It's non-binding vibe check.
Okay.
Non-binding, fine.
Well, one of the things with the last at our body meeting we had, I mean, I love the idea of getting more proactive feedback from members. And again, instead of us being like, this is what we're gonna do, and this is what we want, or whatever, really being like, what do you need, what do you want? I mean, that's the purpose of all of the surveying, that's the purpose of all the formatting, you know, that's being done. If, as far as, you know, voting goes, I don't necessarily know if we want to do something where it's closer to like studying different voting methods, because I do think that's interesting. I think that's fascinating. I'm a bit of a nerd with it. You know, I love like looking at different strategic voting and the pros and cons of certain voting systems. But that would be closer, I assume, something closer like a reading group or a study than actually like actually like consultative, you know, democracy. Because I do think that, you know, ideally, that would be the job of steering to do that, of reaching out and finding ways, phone banking and calling up members and going like, what can we do for you? When we did the, what's the term? I'm going to the term. When we decided like with trans embodied autonomy, right? When we decided on what was going to be
Our chapter priority.
thank you, our chapter priorities, that was essentially the purpose of that. So like, that really is the job of steering ideally, is to be proactive. You know, now, I'm not saying all steerings have to do that, but I love that, because that's ideally what I want for us. I just don't know exactly, you know, how, I feel like there's overlap, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's a good exercise in like practicing different kinds of voting other than just yeah or nay, you know, or
I'm
like.
just, yeah, I mean, one of my biggest contentious points when we were implementing open slides, I remember telling Zach oftentimes was the fact that it was down to just yay or nay, because I do think that consensus democracy is another, again, nerdy decision-making thing. I think it's fascinating. I love talking about these things because they're important. You know, ranked choice voting, I have issues with it because like Condorcet's paradox is a huge issue with ranked choice voting. And like, I don't want it to be like the end all be all for how we decide things, because there are problems with that voting method in and of itself. So I don't know, I think that would be cool to like have as a reading group, like to have as a discussion.
I also think like that is the good thing about having a resolution, is then we could debate it in a meeting. You know, like we could have like a formal debate, like you could say what you think, you could say what you think, everyone else could say what they think, and then we actually do something about it. You know, because I just don't know if like outside of a resolution, how it actually happened.
Right.
And without like making it undemocratic. Right, because then essentially it's just like, okay, we had our little meeting, and we decided together that we're gonna do this, you know, we have to at least open it up to everyone.
Voting is very quick and easy, but it also dilutes conversation, it like dilutes nuance, and that is an issue, you know, that's why.
We putting it like have discussion in the channel.
Exactly, yeah, that's what I was,
Because,
like,
like-
you could recommend what would go on about it.
Yeah.
Somebody's like, you wanna do this or not, I wanna do this or that, you know, or nothing, and then like a ballot is built. And like, I don't know, just, you know, it's nothing official, so it doesn't have to be like that. Tentative.
And as a practical point, I think it would be helpful to have one spot on the Discord where, you know, oh, yeah, here's what's open for discussion, or we're trying to decide on this, rather than you have to remember, okay, which thread was it in? And
Yeah.
what was the original poster?
Or have to
So,
attend a GBM. to
Yeah,
know.
so as a practical matter, I'm all for it, yeah. But I was also thinking, probably steering or something to make sure that we're not running foul of our own bylaws by,
Well,
yeah.
I don't think it would,
I know it's not in any official capacity, but you're right, we could do that and then kind of just close the polls right before the general body meeting and then just have the poll as a discussion. You know, like we could just refer to it, you know, this is something that was brought up in the voter or the sentiment channel, or sorry, my turn. And you know, that maybe, you know, steering would want to talk about it.
I don't mean to like, it just seems like it has a lot of pieces and that's why I like resolutions, it provides a lot of structure. If you wanna like work on a resolution together, we can do that, I'm more than happy to. We can do it if you wanna do it in a channel and make it an open discussion and try to form it together as a group, we can. But it just seems like I don't know necessarily exactly what you're asking. I feel like it's like multiple things in my head. I was trying to like figure out what it is we want.
To be honest, I don't know the full potential, but I'm very like eager to explore them, you know, within the membership.
I think that a good way to start that would be, and we can send it out again, is that survey, because I filled it out as we're doing the meeting and stuff like that, and it's very detailed. It's gonna help us get that general vibe from everybody.
Yeah.
And then I think after then we get a lot of responses, then we can bring it up maybe in the general body meetings, like, hey, just kind of like what we did here. So these are the things that everybody cares about the most, and what are we gonna do about this? And make an actual plan. Then maybe afterwards a resolution to address any of the specific ones.
I just feel like approaching things this way would more engage the membership that we have, because I don't know how many members we currently have, but it's way more than is in this room and way more than attended. And, you know, I think if we just got them to participate and see what they would want out of us going forward, it would.
Well, that's what like the phone banking, I mean, I do think that it's very, very communal, it's very, you know. We can wrap up, yeah. Very quick. Oh,
Just the one thing about the survey and the phone banking is it's kind of like one-to-one. Like when you're calling someone, it's one-to-one to like collect information. Obviously, the surveys were like collecting information and we're all going to discuss the result. But I just feel like it's like depersonalized a little bit, whereas like when you have a discussion like this, you're like getting to know each other and like know like what other people's thoughts are, and it's just like more fun and interesting. So I do feel like we already have a ballot. No, I keep saying ballot because, but like at the resolutions channel, I feel like right now we just use that like when someone has a resolution, we like put it in the channel. I feel like we could use that as like discussion, like because like Michael told me about this concept the other day.
What did I say?
What is like
Oh, a duocracy.
duocracy.
Yes.
This
Yes.
like totally blew my mind because it's basically like the people who have the time to participate, like their views.
It creates an unintentional hierarchy.
It creates a hierarchy because and like you're saying like you're like if we want to change something, let's just work on a ballot resolution. I'm sorry, I keep saying ballot. Let's just work on a resolution. But it's like what if someone like doesn't feel like writing a resolution? I feel like it'd be good to have a place where someone feels like saying like, hey, let's do this in like a way that's like not totally figured out, just like a thought, a vibe. And then other people, and I mean, I feel like you're saying like, a vote is like a really easy thing to do. And like, you do lose nuance, but it's like a low barrier to entry of just like giving a vibe check. So I do think we should like try to think about ways that are like more accessible for people to provide feedback and like kind of like chit chat. That's not just like writing like whereas like.
Wait, was that everything on the chat and everything?
Yeah,
I think.
and